My hands were shaking as I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. The walls were cold, sterile, humming faintly with the buzz of fluorescent lights. I could still hear my daughter's voice echoing from inside, calm, poised, lying through her teeth. "She's not well enough to decide anything." They all believed her. For nearly 2 years, Margaret had been painting a picture of me as confused, fragile, lost in the fog of age. But I remember everything. I remember the moment she took my house keys for safekeeping. The day she said I should stop using the internet, too stressful, Mom. The way she smiled when the doctor handed her the paperwork, nodding solemnly as if she was doing me a favor. Now, I was about to listen to her read a will I supposedly didn't write. Except I had one last move she didn't know about. Inside that courtroom, behind polished oak and cold microphones, the people I loved had rearranged my life like a board game. My son Daniel sat at the back, eyes fixed on the floor, silent as ever. I wondered if he still believed me. Or if he ever had. How do you prove you're sane when everyone profits from calling you crazy? The judge's voice cut through the air. Margaret stood. Her lawyer adjusted his tie. And I felt it, the sharp, final twist of betrayal. This wasn't about protecting me. It never was. It was about control. About inheritance. About silencing the one person who knew the truth. They thought I would sit there quietly, nod along, let them bury me while I was still breathing. But I didn't come here to be buried. I came here to speak. One last time. And what I had to say would change everything. But by then, it was already too late for her. I wasn't always this invisible. There was a time when people looked to me for answers. I was a school principal for over 30 years, sharp, organized, never missed a beat. I raised 3 children on my own after my husband passed away. I kept the house warm, the fridge full, and the bills paid on time. I gave everything I had to that family. Every ounce of energy, every late-night worry, every saved dollar in case someone needed help. Margaret was my firstborn. Bright, ambitious, confident. She always had something to prove, first to her teachers, then to the world, and eventually, to me. She got her law degree by 25 and walked like someone with a plan. I was proud of her, of course I was. But there was always something sharp about her. A hunger for recognition, for control. Even as a child, she'd rewrite the rules of the board games to make sure she won. If you called her out, she'd smile and say, "I'm just playing smart, Mom." Then came Stephen, my middle son, kind-hearted, but never quite grounded. He moved out young, chasing dreams that shifted every year. We lost touch, not by anger, but by distance. He calls sometimes. Says he loves me. I believe him, but he's not part of this story. And then there's Daniel. My youngest. Quiet, thoughtful. He was always the observer. As a boy, he'd sit with me while I graded papers, never saying much, just listening. He didn't fight for attention like Margaret or drift away like Stephen. He just stayed. He was the only one who ever asked how I was doing. Not just as a mother, but as a person. But time has a cruel way of distorting things. People see gray hair and assume confusion. They see slowness and assume weakness. Margaret started stepping in just to help. It began with small things, offering to review my insurance documents, suggesting she automate my bills, adding her name to one of my accounts just in case. She said all the right words. "Mom, you've done enough. Let me handle this now. You should rest. Enjoy your time." And maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted to believe that she really just wanted to make my life easier. Daniel was skeptical from the start. I could see it in the way he looked at her, his brow tight, his words careful. "Do you think you need all this help, Mom?" He'd ask. But I brushed him off. I didn't want them to fight. I didn't want to admit that I felt a little lost. Because the truth is, when you've spent your whole life being strong, it's hard to say, "I don't know what's happening anymore." Margaret had a way of making me question myself. She'd say I forgot things I knew I remembered. She'd gently correct me in front of others, then later scold me for not trusting her.
"Mom, you're getting confused again. You told me I could handle it. Don't you remember?"
And slowly, the world I'd built started shrinking.
Doctors she recommended began showing up. Forms I didn't understand appeared on the kitchen table.
I was being taken to appointments I didn't request.
Every time I asked a question, Margaret would smile and say, "It's just protocol. Don't worry. I've got it all handled." But I wasn't sure anymore who she was handling it for. I wanted to believe this was just love expressed through control. I wanted to believe my daughter would never hurt me. But something about the way she kept talking over me, the way she never looked me in the eye when signing papers, made a chill settle deep inside me. I didn't know it yet, but I was no longer the head of my own household. And the people who called themselves my family were already moving the pieces, without telling me the game had started. It wasn't like flipping a switch. Losing control happened slowly, almost politely. At first, it felt like kindness. Margaret would call more often, drop by unannounced, bring groceries I didn't ask for. She'd say things like, "You've done so much for us, Mom. Let me take care of things now." And I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because deep down, I was tired. After all those years working, raising kids, fixing leaking roofs and balancing checkbooks, maybe I had earned the right to lean on someone. Just a little. Just for a while. So, when Margaret offered to help pay a few bills, I said yes. When she asked for access to my online banking to make things easier, I hesitated, but I still said yes. I trusted her. She was my daughter. She even brought over Warren Briggs, the family's longtime attorney, to help me get things in order. Warren had always been distant, professional, but friendly enough. He used big words I no longer had the energy to question. He assured me we were just preparing for long-term security and protection.
There were forms to sign, things I didn't fully understand, but Margaret kept smiling, nodding encouragingly.
"Just sign, Mom.
This way, you'll never have to worry again."
And I didn't want to worry. So I signed.
That was the moment it began, though I wouldn't know that for months. Soon, things that used to be mine stopped belonging to me. My mail started going to her address.
My phone calls to the bank were redirected.
I'd ask about a check or an account balance, and Margaret would tell me not to stress, that she had it covered. She started speaking for me at doctor's appointments.
Correcting me. Saying things like, "She's having memory problems," even when I wasn't. Even when I knew exactly what was happening. It was like being slowly erased. One afternoon, I couldn't find my car keys. Margaret calmly told me she'd taken them, said it was for my safety. "What if you got lost, Mom? You've been forgetting things lately."
That day, I sat on the porch for 2 hours, just staring at the empty driveway, wondering how many other little things were gone without me realizing it.
Daniel noticed.
He never said much, but his eyes did. When he visited, he'd linger a little longer, gently asking questions like, "How are things going with Margaret helping out?
Do you feel okay about it?" I'd always say yes.
What else could I say? If I admitted I didn't feel okay, then I'd have to face the truth, that I had handed over the reins of my life and didn't know how to take them back.
And even if I tried, who would believe me?
That was Margaret's genius. She wasn't cruel, at least not in ways people could easily see. She was helpful.
Concerned.
Always in control, always speaking in that patient tone people use when they think someone is slipping.
People started looking at me differently. Like I was fragile. Like I was less.
When I tried to bring it up with Warren, tried to ask what exactly I'd signed, he brushed me off.
Said everything was already filed. "You're protected now," he told me, avoiding my eyes. I started to feel like I wasn't just being managed. I was being contained.
But still, a part of me wanted to believe this was love.
That Margaret was just overbearing.
That she didn't mean harm. That hope shattered the day I found the letter. I was looking for a birthday card I'd tucked away, and instead I found a thick envelope on my desk unmarked, folded, and torn slightly at the corner. It was a letter from a financial institution I didn't recognize. Inside, it listed a withdrawal for an amount I hadn't approved. When I asked Margaret, she didn't even blink. "Oh, that? I used it for legal fees. Everything's still in your name. Don't worry about it, Mom. Don't worry." That phrase had become a kind of weapon. From that moment on, I started keeping track. Quietly. I wrote notes in the margins of old books. I made copies of statements when no one was around. I started asking different questions when Warren wasn't present. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to prove, only that I had to hold on to something real. Something that was still mine. The worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the loss of my car, or my name on a bank account. It was the feeling that I was no longer the author of my own life. That I was a guest in my own story, narrated by someone else. I told Daniel once, quietly, when Margaret stepped outside. "I think something's happening. I think she's hiding things from me." He looked at me, long and hard. Then just nodded. That tiny gesture was enough to keep me going. Because even if the world no longer believed me, I still believed myself. It started with a doctor's appointment I didn't ask for. Margaret picked me up one morning, saying we were going for lunch. But instead of the cafe, she pulled into a parking lot outside a private clinic I'd never seen before. "Just a quick checkup," she said with that same rehearsed smile I was starting to distrust. "Routine stuff. Nothing serious." Inside, the doctor was polite but distant. He asked me strange questions, the kind that made me feel like I was being tested for something I didn't even know was wrong. "What year is it? Who's the president? Count backward from 100 by sevens." I answered every question, but his expression never changed. Margaret sat beside me, nodding along, chiming in when I paused. "She's been forgetting things. Getting confused lately. We're just trying to make sure she's safe." Safe. That word again. That afternoon, I became something else. Not a mother. Not a retired principal. Not a woman with memories and preferences and dignity. I became a case. A week later, a letter arrived. It said I was no longer able to make decisions for myself. That Margaret had been granted legal guardianship. That all financial, medical, and personal decisions would now go through her in my best interest. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, just staring at the page. The same table where I used to help my kids with their homework. The same table where we'd celebrate birthdays and sort bills and play board games with missing pieces. Now it held a document that quietly erased my voice. And the worst part? It looked official. Clean. Legal. I called the bank to ask what this meant. The woman on the line told me, gently, that I was no longer authorized to access my own accounts. "You'll need to speak with your guardian," she said, like I was a child. From that moment on, nothing was mine. My mailbox was rerouted. My car was sold, without even a phone call. My prescriptions were filled without me knowing what they were for. Even the pictures in my hallway started to feel like they belonged to someone else. Margaret came and went as she pleased, using my house like an office. Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone, talking about my assets, my estate, like I was already gone. And Daniel. Daniel visited less. I think he didn't know what to do. When he came, he looked at me like I was fading. Like maybe what Margaret said was true. That was the most terrifying part. Not the legal documents. Not the doctor's report. Not even the silence from Warren Briggs, who wouldn't return my calls anymore. It was the way people around me started to doubt me, slowly, quietly. The way they looked at me like I was slipping away, even though I was still here, still clear, still me. How do you fight something you can't prove? How do you explain to the world that you're not losing your mind, you're being written out? I started to question myself. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I had signed something I didn't fully understand. Maybe it was my fault for trusting her. That's how they get you.
They don't need to break you down all at once. They just chip away at your confidence until you stop speaking up. Until you start doubting your own reality. Until the silence feels safer than the truth. But in that silence, I began to listen more carefully. To the details Margaret tried to hide. To the way Warren avoided specifics. To the gaps in what the doctors wrote. And I began to see a pattern, one designed not to help me, but to control everything I had left. They thought they'd won. That the paperwork was enough. But what they didn't know was that I had already started documenting everything. And I wasn't as alone as they believed. The walls in the care facility were always too white, blinding, like they were trying to scrub out anything personal. They told me it was temporary. That it was for my well-being. That Margaret had arranged everything because she couldn't manage my care at home anymore. The word care echoed in my head until it lost all meaning. I hadn't asked to be moved. I hadn't agreed to anything. But suddenly, I was here. In a room that wasn't mine, surrounded by strangers in scrubs who spoke to me like I was a child. I wasn't allowed to keep my phone. My calls had to be approved. My visitors were limited for recovery purposes. Recovery from what? No one could explain. The staff were kind but distant, always following a protocol, always referencing the chart. I became less of a person and more of a number. Room 114. Ward B. Under observation. Margaret visited once a week. She brought flowers. Sat for 20 minutes. Told the nurses how difficult it had been to watch me decline. Then she'd pat my hand and say, "You don't need to worry about anything anymore. Just rest." Rest from what? From living? I remember asking a nurse one day if I could go for a walk outside. She smiled politely and said it needed to be cleared with the legal guardian. I laughed. I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. I wasn't allowed to go outside without permission. Not even for 5 minutes of air. I sat on the edge of my bed, stunned. That's when it really sank in. I wasn't free. And no one saw it as a crime. They saw it as a procedure. Daniel visited, but not often. When he came, he didn't know what to say. I could see the conflict in his eyes, like he wasn't sure if what he saw in front of him was the truth or just what he'd been told to expect. He'd ask, "Is everything okay here?" And I'd nod, because what else could I say? I didn't want to put more weight on his already quiet shoulders. But I saw him watching. I saw him noticing the way the staff ignored me, how Margaret spoke for me even when I was right there. It was Nurse Carla who changed things. She wasn't like the others. She didn't talk at me. She asked real questions. She noticed I remembered everything: names, dates, news stories. She saw how carefully I folded my clothes, how I kept a notebook tucked under my mattress. One day, when she came in to check my blood pressure, she whispered, "You're not what they say you are you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. From that moment on, I began writing more. Documenting everything. Names. Conversations. Dates Margaret visited. What she said. What she didn't say. I wasn't sure who would ever read it, but it gave me purpose. It reminded me that I still existed, still had a voice, even if it was only on paper. Sometimes, at night, I'd lie awake listening to the sound of doors opening and closing down the hall. And I'd think about my home. The one Margaret had taken over. The photographs. The garden. My piano. Were they all gone now? Packed up? Sold? Was I already a ghost in my own life? There was a moment, maybe 2 months in, when I genuinely questioned whether I should just give in. Accept that this was it now. Eat the meals they brought. Smile when spoken to. Fade away quietly. But then I remembered something Daniel said years ago, when he was still in school. We were sitting on the porch, and he asked, "Mom, how do you know what's right, even when everyone else says you're wrong?" And I told him, "You remember what you stand for. Even if you're standing alone." So I stood. Not in the way people expected. Not with shouting or fists. But in quiet defiance. In writing everything down. In making eye contact when they spoke to me like I was confused. In remembering. Every detail. Every lie. Every shift in Margaret's voice when she thought no one was listening. They thought I was weak. But they forgot one thing. I had been underestimated before. And I had survived every time. The betrayal didn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It came in an envelope. A nurse handed it to me during morning rounds, an official-looking packet with my name on it. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might be a mistake. But as I opened it and saw the contents, my hands began to tremble. It was the deed to my house. Sold. Transferred. Finalized. My home, the place I raised my children, the one my husband and I built from scratch, room by room, was gone. No warning. No conversation. No goodbye. Just a stack of legal documents that told me it no longer belonged to me. It had been sold while I sat in a facility I never chose, wearing someone else's slippers, asking permission to take a walk. When Margaret came to visit that week, I didn't ask. I didn't plead. I simply held up the papers. She didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. It was for your benefit, she said. You couldn't keep up with the maintenance. You needed care. We had no other choice. We. I remember thinking, who is we? Because I hadn't been part of that decision. I hadn't even been consulted. She leaned in and said, with that same rehearsed calm, it's all taken care of now. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. I wanted to scream. But no sound came out. That night, I sat in my room with the deed clutched in my lap. My throat was dry. My hands felt hollow. There is a kind of betrayal that doesn't hurt all at once, it just unravels you thread by thread. And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't about helping me. It never had been. This was about control. About claiming what I had built. About writing me out of my own story, one legal move at a time. But something inside me, something that hadn't died yet, tightened. They may have taken my house, my car, my bank account. But I still had one thing left. My truth. And I wasn't going to let them bury it. Not without a fight. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The sun was spilling through the window of my room, and I was sitting in my usual chair, rereading the same page of a book I couldn't focus on. I had grown used to the rhythm of this place, medication rounds, soft footsteps in the hall, voices muffled behind closed doors. But then Daniel showed up. He hadn't visited in a while. His eyes looked heavier. He didn't hug me right away. Just sat beside me, like he wasn't sure how to begin. Then he pulled something from his bag. A flash drive. He placed it on the table between us like it was made of glass. I've been recording everything, he said. His voice was low, almost like he was afraid someone might hear. Phone calls, emails. I've been tracking where the money's gone. Margaret's moved most of it. The house sale? She made a side deal with Warren Briggs. Signed over power of attorney before the guardianship was even approved. I stared at him, unable to speak. He looked up and said something I didn't expect to hear. I should have believed you sooner, Mom. It was like a dam broke inside me. Not from anger. Not even relief. Just this deep ache, the kind that comes from being seen again after so long in the dark. Daniel had been quiet, yes. But he had been watching. Waiting. Gathering proof when no one else would even ask questions. And he wasn't alone. Nurse Carla had submitted a statement. She wrote about my clarity, how I could recall exact conversations, describe people in detail. She admitted she felt uncomfortable with the way Margaret and the lawyer spoke around me. She had reported it, but it was buried. Until now. Daniel told me he'd found something else, too. A will.
Not the one Margaret planned to use. Not the one that gave her control. But my will. The one I'd written years ago with a different attorney, when I was still fully independent. When my mind was sharp and my intentions clear. I had hidden a copy in a sealed envelope, one that Daniel had found tucked inside a box of my old teaching records. And it changed everything. The will named Daniel as the sole executor. It detailed where every dollar should go, who should be protected, and who should be held accountable. The smile on Daniel's face wasn't vengeful. It was steady. Resolute. He wasn't doing this for revenge. He was doing it for justice. For truth. For me. In that moment, for the first time in months, I felt the ground return beneath my feet. They thought they had erased me. But they missed the one part of me they could never touch. Hope. Hidden. Growing. Waiting for the right moment to rise. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Not because of the air, but because of the weight in that room, the silence, the tension, the unspoken stories clinging to the walls. I sat in my chair, dressed in the same navy blouse Margaret used to call too plain, my hands steady, my back straight. Margaret was already there, sitting with her lawyer, Warren Briggs. She looked polished, as always. Composed. Like a woman in charge of the narrative. Until the judge called my name. Daniel stood up beside me, placing the original will gently on the table like it was a sacred artifact. His voice didn't tremble. Your Honor, this is the last known and valid will, signed while my mother was still fully independent. It overrides the documents submitted by the guardianship attorney. There was a shift in the room. A hush. I took a deep breath and stood. No one expected me to speak. They had gotten used to me being silent, passive. But not today. I looked directly at Margaret. And then I spoke. I told the court how I had been manipulated, how the guardianship process was twisted into a tool of control. I described the appointments I never asked for, the decisions made without me, the sale of my home. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. And for the first time, people listened. The judge asked Margaret to explain the discrepancies. She stumbled. Her lawyer tried to deflect, but the documentation was airtight. Between the recordings, the bank transfers, the nurse's testimony, and the original will, there was nowhere left to hide. The judge didn't need long. The guardianship was dissolved. The will was upheld. The assets Margaret had tried to absorb were frozen pending investigation. And just like that, the silence I had been trapped in finally broke. Not with a scream. Not with vengeance. But with a quiet, undeniable truth. As I walked out of that courtroom, the sun hit my face. Daniel reached for my hand. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Because the real victory wasn't just the legal win. It was that I had spoken. And I had been heard. After all those months of being erased, my story was finally my own again. The echoes of the gavel have long faded, but their meaning still vibrates in my chest. I wake up each morning in a small apartment near the courthouse, temporary, unfurnished, yet undeniably mine. The first thing I do is open the window and let fresh air rush in. For months, I begged for a simple walk outside. Now the sky itself feels like a gift I signed for in my own handwriting. Daniel visits on weekends. He brings groceries, jokes about my stubborn taste in tea, and quietly scans the mail for any leftover traps from Margaret's old schemes. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. And I let him, because love sometimes looks like vigilance. Most days, though, I walk 3 blocks to the community center. They've given me a desk, nothing fancy, just a donated laptop and a lamp with a slightly crooked shade. There, I sit with people who arrive carrying crumpled paperwork and fragile hope, widowers whose pensions went missing, sisters cut off from elderly parents, sons who suspect the signatures on house deeds aren't quite right. I listen first. Then I help them write down everything they know, names, dates, whispered threats, tiny victories. I show them how to turn scattered memories into evidence, how to transform a shaky voice into a sworn statement.
Because silence is the easiest cage to build and the hardest to break alone. Some afternoons Nurse Carla joins me after her shift. We sip bad coffee and draft guides on how to spot guardianship abuse, the little red flags doctors miss, the polite lies family members tell, the legal jargon that can gut a lifetime in 3 paragraphs. She laughs when I get fiery, reminds me to pause and breathe. I remind her anger is only dangerous when you let it whisper instead of speak. Margaret? An investigation is pending. I don't follow every detail, the law moves slowly, and I have work to do today. Justice will arrive when it's ready, heavy boots, deliberate steps. I'm content knowing it's on the way. Sometimes, walking home at dusk, I pass families on porch swings, children yelling into twilight. I catch my reflection in a window, older, yes, but unmistakably alive. They tried to archive me, misfile me, sell me off. Instead, I became a reference point for anyone told they're too old, too confused, better off quiet. So if you're watching this and you feel a door closing around you, remember, there's always a hinge they missed, a ally who's listening, a sentence you haven't spoken yet. Write it down. Say it out loud. Hand it to someone who still believes in paper cuts and courtroom light. Because every story they bury is a seed waiting for the moment it splits concrete and grows tall enough to shade someone else. And I plan to keep planting until the whole field blooms with voices they can never silence again.